It was supposed to be the calm before a long off-season reset. The Cleveland Browns had just moved on from their head coach. Fans were finally letting themselves breathe. And for the first time in a while, there was a sense that at least one major question had already been answered. After all the chaos, the injuries, the blown protection, and the constant dysfunction, the Browns finally had something they could build around. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Then, one press conference shattered that illusion almost instantly. General Manager Andrew Berry stepped to the podium, and within minutes, Cleveland found itself right back where it always ends up: confused, divided, and bracing for another quarterback controversy. With a few carefully chosen words, Berry managed to drain the optimism out of the room and replace it with uncertainty, the kind of uncertainty that Browns fans know all too well. The kind that turns hope into outrage before the microphones are even turned off. The frustrating part is that this didn't happen because something went wrong on the field. No bad throw, no collapse in a big moment, no off-field blow-up. This happened because the man in charge refused to say what fans believed was obvious. When asked directly about the future of the quarterback position, about Shedeur Sanders, Berry didn't offer reassurance. He didn't offer commitment. Instead, he offered hesitation, and in Cleveland, hesitation hits harder than bad news. For months, Browns fans had watched Shedeur Sanders grind through one of the worst situations a young quarterback can walk into: a broken offense, constant pressure, coaching instability. Yet somehow, the longer the season dragged on, the more he settled in. Drives became cleaner, decisions got quicker. Teammates rallied behind him. Even franchise cornerstones began speaking about him with respect. It felt like the story was writing itself: survive the chaos, earn the job, and finally give Cleveland a real direction. That's why what came next felt like a betrayal. Berry's words didn't just reopen a debate, they sent a message that maybe all that progress wasn't enough. Maybe the growth didn't matter. Maybe the Browns were once again unwilling to plant their flag and build around a young quarterback who fought through damn near impossible circumstances. And when you're a fan of this franchise, that silence, that hedging, that refusal to commit is louder than any outright criticism. Because this isn't just about one press conference. It's about a pattern, a cycle Cleveland has repeated for years. Find a quarterback, question him publicly, create unnecessary doubt, let pressure mount, and when things get shaky, act shocked that nothing worked out. That's why this moment matters. Not because Berry said something outrageous, but because he said just enough to make everyone wonder if the Browns learned absolutely nothing from their past. And here's the part that should really make fans uneasy. If a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, who showed growth, resilience, and leadership in a broken system, still hasn't done enough to earn public confidence, then what exactly does this organization expect? What standard are they holding him to? And more importantly, who do they believe is realistically walking through that door to replace him? Because once you peel back the careful language and PR-safe phrasing, this situation starts to look a lot less like strategy and a lot more like the same old Browns problem wearing a different suit. And once you hear what Berry actually said and what it quietly implies about the team's real plans, it becomes impossible not to ask the question every Browns fan is thinking right now. Are we watching caution from a smart general manager, or the beginning of yet another quarterback disaster Cleveland helped create all on its own? The shift didn't happen during a game. It didn't happen after a brutal loss or a season-ending interception. It happened quietly in a press conference room with polite questions, neutral tones, and answers that sounded safe on the surface but felt explosive underneath. The Cleveland Browns had already ripped off the bandage by moving on from Kevin Stefanski, and for a brief moment, it felt like the organization might finally embrace clarity instead of chaos. That moment didn't last long. When Andrew Berry stepped to the podium, the expectation wasn't fireworks. Nobody was asking him to solve the future in one afternoon. Fans understood there were evaluations to be made, interviews to conduct, contracts to navigate. What they wanted was direction. A signal, a sign that at least one pillar of the rebuild was already locked in. Instead, what they got felt like the ground shifting beneath their feet. The tone of the press conference was calm, almost clinical, but that's what made it unsettling. This wasn't a defensive GM under pressure. This was a calculated response, carefully worded, strategically vague, and yet the message landed like a gut punch, because instead of using the moment to close the book on uncertainty, Barry opened a brand new chapter of doubt. Not about the past season, not about the coaching search, about the most important position in sports. What made it worse was the timing. This wasn't mid-season deflection or trade deadline ambiguity. This was the reset moment, the clean slate, the chance to stabilize the franchise after chaos. By refusing to draw a clear line in the sand, Barry didn't just keep his options open, he reopened wounds that Cleveland fans thought were finally healing, wounds built from years of indecision, short leashes, and half-commitments at quarterback. The reaction was immediate. Media members exchanged looks, social media lit up. Fans who had spent weeks convincing themselves that for once the Browns wouldn't overthink this felt that familiar sinking feeling return, the one that says, "Here we go again." Because Browns fans have learned something painfully well over the years. When leadership talks like this, it's never accidental, it's never meaningless, and it almost always leads somewhere nobody enjoys. This wasn't just another off-season press conference. This was the moment the narrative changed, the moment optimism stopped feeling safe, the moment everyone realized that whatever confidence had been built late in the season was far more fragile than it appeared. And once that door was cracked open, all the old questions came rushing back in. Because if the Browns weren't ready to commit now, after everything that happened, then when exactly were they planning to? And that question only gets louder once you understand why so many fans believe the quarterback debate had already been settled. For a lot of fans, the quarterback debate didn't quietly fade away. It ended decisively over the final stretch of the season. Not because everything suddenly became perfect, but because for the first time in years, the Browns finally had a young quarterback who didn't shrink under chaos. Shedeur Sanders stepped into a situation that would have broken most players and somehow managed to look steadier as things got worse around him. The offensive line leaked, play calls came in late, receivers struggled to separate. Yet week after week, Sanders stayed upright mentally, even when he couldn't stay clean in the pocket. The game slowed down for him. You could see it in his eyes, in the way he stopped forcing throws and started taking what defenses gave him. Drives that used to stall now ended in points. Late game possessions stopped feeling hopeless. For Browns fans conditioned to dread every third and long, that alone felt revolutionary. What really shifted the mood wasn't just the box score, it was the moments, the poise on game-deciding drives, the calm responses after hits that should have rattled him, the way teammates responded when things got tense. This wasn't empty optimism or fan fiction. It was tangible progress happening in real time. Progress in the middle of dysfunction, which made it feel even more legitimate. That belief only hardened when leaders inside the locker room started saying the quiet part out loud. When Myles Garrett, a player who has seen every version of this franchise, publicly spoke with respect about Sanders, it meant something. Garrett isn't known for handing out praise lightly, especially to quarterbacks. For fans, that endorsement carried real weight. It signaled that Sanders wasn't just surviving, he was earning trust where it actually matters. By the end of the season, the conversation had naturally shifted. It wasn't, "Can he play?" anymore. It was, "How do you build around this?" That's why many fans mentally checked the quarterback box and moved on to bigger issues, fixing the line, finding weapons, stabilizing coaching. Sanders felt like the rare part of the roster that didn't need constant reevaluation. And that's exactly why the press conference hit so hard, because it wasn't just walking back a decision that hadn't been announced. It felt like rewriting what everyone had just watched unfold with their own eyes. If this wasn't enough, if surviving, improving, and leading under those conditions didn't earn confidence, then the standard suddenly felt impossible. For a fan base starved for stability, the idea that the Browns still weren't ready to say, "This is our guy," felt less like caution and more like denial. And once that doubt crept back in, the next question became unavoidable. If Sanders hadn't cleared the bar, what exactly does the front office believe will? What made this blow up wasn't a single dramatic quote or an obvious slight. In fact, on the surface, Andrew Barry sounded almost complimentary. That's what made it dangerous. He started by saying all the right things, the kind of praise that feels reassuring if you're only half paying attention. He talked about growth, about development, about seeing progress both physically and mentally. He mentioned improved accuracy, better playmaking, and strides in managing the pocket. On paper, it read like a vote of confidence. And for a few moments, it felt like the room relaxed. But in Cleveland, fans have learned to listen carefully to what comes after the praise, because the Browns' real truth is always hiding in the follow-up sentence. And sure enough, that's exactly where everything unraveled. The language shifted from acknowledgement to uncertainty, from reflection to hedging. Barry didn't challenge the idea that progress had happened, he diluted its meaning. The moment that set everything on fire wasn't loud or aggressive, it was subtle. A calm admission that the team still needed to do its work at quarterback. A reminder that the solution might be internal or external. In most organizations, those words might barely register. In Cleveland, they land like a warning shot, because everyone knows what they actually mean. They mean nothing is settled. They mean nobody is safe. They mean the clock is still ticking. That phrasing mattered more than anything else he said, not because it was shocking, but because it was familiar. Browns fans have heard this exact tone before, right before the franchise talks itself into
starting over again. It's the language of optional commitment, the kind that protects leverage in boardrooms while creating chaos everywhere else. And once those words were out there, the press conference stopped being about evaluation and started becoming about trust. What made it worse was how carefully it was delivered. This wasn't a GM caught off guard. This was measured, deliberate, almost rehearsed, which told fans something they didn't want to admit. This wasn't an accident. Barry wanted the door open. He wanted flexibility. And in doing so, he quietly undermined the momentum that had been built over months of on-field growth. The reaction wasn't outrage at first, it was confusion, then disbelief, then anger, because everyone watching understood the contradiction. How can a quarterback show clear development under horrible conditions and still be treated like a temporary solution? How can progress be real, tangible, and documented, yet still not enough to earn a public commitment? That's when the narrative flipped. This stopped being about responsible evaluation and became about messaging failure, about how saying the wrong thing at the wrong time can erase goodwill faster than a losing streak. And as media voices began dissecting every word, one reality became unavoidable. If the Browns truly believed in their quarterback, there would have been no reason to speak like this at all. And once the language exposed that hesitation, fans started asking the next logical question. If the front office is this unsure, what exactly are they seeing as a better alternative? Almost immediately after the press conference, the conversation pivoted to the draft. It always does. Anytime a team refuses to commit at quarterback, the draft becomes the easiest distraction, the cleanest way to justify uncertainty. And in Cleveland's case, it quickly turned into what felt less like a real plan and more like a smokescreen, a convenient talking point that sounds proactive without forcing any actual decisions. On the surface, the logic seems sound. You explore everything, you evaluate the class, you keep your options open. That's what Cleveland Browns fans were told. But the deeper you look at this draft landscape, the harder it becomes to believe that the Browns are truly positioning themselves to solve their quarterback situation this way. Reports suggest the front office understands this, which makes the public flirtation with draft scenarios feel more like theater than strategy. This isn't one of those years where elite quarterback prospects are stacked at the top, forcing desperate teams into bold moves. This is a draft filled with question marks.
developmental players, high ceilings paired with glaring concerns. That matters when you're holding a premium pick and already carrying major holes across your roster. Offensive line issues, limited weapons, depth concerns on defense. Using that level of draft capital on a quarterback who may need years to develop isn't aggressive, it's reckless. That's why many around the league aren't buying the idea that Cleveland is seriously preparing to pull the trigger. Trading up would require sacrificing future picks they can't afford to lose. Staying put means reaching for talent in a class that doesn't justify it. And all of that would be happening while a young quarterback who already showed real progress sits on the roster. It doesn't add up, not from a football standpoint, not from a roster building standpoint. And yet, the draft continues to be floated as a possibility, not because it's likely, but because it keeps leverage alive. It keeps fans guessing. It keeps agents wondering. It allows leadership to say they've explored every avenue without committing to one. That's why this feels less like preparation and more like positioning, a way to keep the conversation moving while avoiding a definitive stance.
What makes the draft talk especially hollow is that even if Cleveland did fall in love with someone, the cost would reshape the franchise in ways that rarely end well. Mortgaging multiple years of picks to chase a quarterback in a shaky class is how teams stay bad longer. It's how rebuilds stall out before they ever take shape. And history hasn't exactly shown that this organization thrives when it panics. That's why the draft angle feels like misdirection, something to point at while the front office comes to terms with what's actually available. Because once you strip away the hype, once you run the numbers, once you look at the roster honestly, the draft stops looking like a solution and starts looking like a talking point. And that realization leads directly into the most uncomfortable truth Cleveland is trying to dance around. If the draft isn't a realistic escape hatch, then the Browns are forced to confront what's already in the building, and that's when this situation becomes impossible to spin. No matter how carefully the Browns word their plans, there's one reality they can't talk their way around. One name that keeps looming over every conversation, every draft projection, every hypothetical quarterback plan: Deshaun Watson. And not because of performance, potential, or upside, but because of a contract that has quietly boxed the franchise into a corner. This is the part nobody in the organization wants to say out loud. The Browns are financially tied to Watson in a way that makes most normal quarterback decisions impossible. The guaranteed money, the cap impact, the structure of the deal, it all adds up to a situation where moving on simply isn't realistic, at least not yet. Cutting him isn't an option, trading him is almost unthinkable, and pretending otherwise only delays the inevitable. Before the injury, Watson didn't look like a quarterback ready to reclaim his old form. The mobility wasn't the same, the timing felt off, the confidence that once defined his game seemed shaken. That alone would spark concern on any team, but in Cleveland, it created a unique kind of paralysis, because despite the on-field struggles, the contract ensures his presence whether the front office likes it or not. That's what makes the public hesitation about the starting job feel so hollow. When Andrew Berry talks about exploring the market, there's an unspoken asterisk attached. The Browns can look, but they can't touch. They can evaluate, but they can't escape. Every theoretical plan eventually crashes into the same immovable object. Watson is on the roster. Once you accept that reality, everything else starts to make more sense. The draft talk, the vague language, the refusal to commit. It isn't about believing there's a better option waiting out there. It's about managing optics while navigating a financial trap of their own making. And when you view it through that lens, the direction becomes clearer, even if it's uncomfortable. Because this isn't really about choosing between endless possibilities. It's about trying to balance a young quarterback who earned momentum with a veteran quarterback the team is financially married to. It's about avoiding public embarrassment while privately accepting there's no clean reset button. And that's exactly how you end up with a situation nobody wants, but everyone can see coming.
The Browns didn't just inherit this dilemma, they built it themselves, and now every decision has to work around it, which is why the most likely outcome isn't some bold external move, it's something far more predictable, a solution that sounds fair, competitive, and reasonable on the surface, but only exists because the franchise ran out of real options.
Once you strip away the press conference language and the draft smoke, the path Cleveland is drifting toward becomes painfully obvious. Not because anyone has announced it outright, but because every other route quietly collapses under scrutiny. What's left is the one outcome fans were never excited about and never asked for, a quarterback competition that exists more out of necessity than belief. This is where the Browns are heading. A summer filled with carefully worded updates, coaches praising competition, insiders floating depth chart debates, and fans bracing themselves for a camp battle between Shedeur Sanders and Deshaun Watson that nobody truly feels good about. On paper, it sounds reasonable. Let them battle it out. Let the best man win. That's the clean, coach-speak version. The reality is far messier. Quarterback competitions rarely happen when organizations are confident. They happen when leadership is unsure, constrained, or afraid to commit. This one checks all three boxes. Sanders represents momentum and potential. Watson represents contract obligation and unresolved questions. The competition isn't about football purity, it's about buying time and avoiding definitive answers. For a young quarterback, this environment is brutal. Sanders wouldn't just be competing against another player, he'd be competing against doubt baked into the organization itself. Every rep dissected, every mistake amplified, every slow start treated like confirmation of fear rather than part of development. That's not how franchises cultivate young leaders. That's how they manufacture short leashes and manufactured controversy. From the outside, it'll be framed as fair. From the inside, it risks poisoning the well. Veterans won't know who to rally behind. Free agents won't know what offense they're signing up for. Coaches won't know which system they're truly building. And fans will spend the entire summer arguing instead of looking forward. All because the Browns refused to choose a direction when they had the chance. The irony is that the competition almost feels pre-decided. Watson, before going down, didn't look like someone redefining the position. Sanders, meanwhile, spent the second half of the season doing exactly what organizations claim they want, growing under pressure and earning trust in the locker room. Yet instead of building on that, Cleveland is resetting the clock and calling it fairness. This is the kind of move that feels safe in the moment and damaging in the long run. It protects leadership from criticism if things go wrong, but it does nothing to protect the quarterback who actually has to live with the consequences. And once training camp begins, the noise won't fade, it'll multiply. Because the moment struggles surface, and they always do, this competition won't feel neutral anymore. It'll feel like an excuse. And that's when everyone will realize that the Browns didn't create clarity by keeping their options open, they just delayed the chaos until the next chapter. While the quarterback debate has dominated the spotlight, the Browns' coaching search may be telling an even more revealing story, because long before a depth chart is finalized or a starter is named, the choice at head coach quietly exposes what an organization truly believes. Not what it says publicly, but where it's actually willing to invest its future. And in Cleveland's case, that choice might say more about their quarterback plans than any press conference ever could. One name keeps surfacing behind the scenes: Jim Schwartz. He's respected, experienced, trusted internally, and there's a shared history with Andrew Berry that makes the connection easy. On paper, it's a safe move. A continuity move, the kind of hire that avoids disruption and keeps part of the machine running smoothly. But that's exactly what makes it so revealing. Hiring a defensive-minded head coach sends a very specific message. It suggests the Browns see their defense as the foundation worth protecting, not the quarterback situation as the engine worth maximizing. It implies that offense is still something to be managed rather than built around.
And if that's true, it raises an uncomfortable question about Shedeur Sanders, because organizations that believe they've found their quarterback don't hedge with conservative coaching hires. They lean in. When teams are fully committed to a young quarterback, the blueprint is obvious. You bring in an offensive architect, someone modern, someone bold, someone whose entire identity revolves around development and adaptation. That's how you signal belief. That's how you build alignment from the top down. Anything less feels like hesitation disguised as stability. If Cleveland goes the Schwartz route, the subtext becomes hard to ignore. It suggests the front office isn't ready to tie its future to Sanders just yet. Not enough to reshape the coaching staff around him. Not enough to gamble on an offensive innovator. Instead, it looks like a plan built on containment. Keep the defense strong, manage the offense, and survive another year without committing fully to a long-term vision. This is where the coaching choice stops being a separate conversation and starts becoming the loudest answer Cleveland hasn't given yet. Because a defensive hire fits neatly with a quarterback competition. It fits with short leashes, it fits with flexibility and hesitation. What it doesn't fit with is a franchise ready to bet on its young quarterback. And that's why this decision matters so much. The Browns don't need to say whether they believe in Sanders. The coaching hire will say it for them. And once that move is made, everything else, the depth chart, the offseason noise, the long-term expectations, will fall into place accordingly. This is the part where everything starts to feel uncomfortably familiar, not because the names are the same, but because the behavior is. The Cleveland Browns don't fail loudly anymore. They fail through hesitation, through half measures, through an almost reflexive inability to commit when the moment demands clarity. And once you recognize the pattern, it's impossible to unsee it. For years, Cleveland's quarterback problems weren't just about talent, they were about trust. Young quarterbacks were rarely allowed to simply develop. They were evaluated publicly, doubted quickly, and rotated through systems that never fully belonged to them. Every bad game became a referendum. Every struggle became justification to reset, and every reset made the next quarterback's leash even shorter. This is how instability becomes culture. What's happening now fits that mold perfectly. Sanders wasn't crowned, he wasn't protected, he wasn't given organizational backing and told, "You're the guy, grow into it." Instead, he's been left in limbo, praised but not trusted, acknowledged but not empowered. That gray area is where the Browns have quietly buried more quarterbacks than outright mistakes ever did. This is the dangerous part of indecision. It feels responsible in the moment. It sounds smart in press conferences. But over time, it creates an environment where no one ever fully succeeds because no one is ever fully supported. Coaches don't commit to systems. Players don't commit to leaders. Fans don't commit to hope. Everything stays provisional. And the most telling part? When things eventually go wrong, leadership can always say they were never all in, that they were still evaluating, that they turned over every stone. That's not vision. It's insulation. And franchises that operate this way rarely stumble into success. They stall, they spin, they reset again. This pattern explains why optimism in Cleveland is always fragile, why progress is never allowed to simply be progress, why every step forward comes with an asterisk. The Browns don't just struggle to find answers, they struggle to stand behind them. That's why this moment matters more than any single season or depth chart. Because if the organization can't break this cycle now, with a young quarterback who already proved he can handle adversity, then it's fair to wonder if they ever will. And once that question takes root, it's only a matter of time before the next reset arrives, with a new coach, a new quarterback, and the same old promises. The real fallout from this moment won't show up on a stat sheet, and it won't be solved with a depth chart update. It's going to play out slowly, quietly, and relentlessly over the next several months. Every rumor will feel louder. Every report will feel more dramatic. Every whisper about quarterback options will gain traction, not because the Browns are actually close to making a move, but because they created a vacuum where certainty should have existed. Expect a never-ending loop of speculation, reports suggesting interest in quarterbacks Cleveland can't realistically afford. draft rumors that don't survive contact with logic, anonymous sourcing about internal debates and philosophical differences. All of it will thrive because the organization refused to define a clear direction when it had the chance. And the longer that uncertainty lingers, the harder it becomes to control the narrative. Training camp won't calm things down either. A quarterback competition might sound fair in theory, but in practice it invites weekly controversy. Every throw will be analyzed, every practice clip dissected. The moment either quarterback struggles, the calls for change will begin, not because fans are impatient, but because the organization itself signaled that nothing is settled. Uncertainty breeds noise, and noise eventually erodes confidence. Even if Shedeur Sanders emerges as the starter, the damage won't magically disappear. The leash will be short, the patience thinner. One rough stretch will reignite the entire debate because the foundation was never reinforced. That's not how young quarterbacks thrive. That's how they survive, until they don't. What makes this outcome so frustrating is that it wasn't inevitable. This wasn't forced by performance. It wasn't demanded by the roster. It wasn't driven by opportunity. It was a choice to hedge instead of commit, to manage optics instead of momentum, to protect flexibility instead of belief. And that choice tells you exactly where the Browns still struggle the most. This offseason had the potential to represent a turning point, a chance to finally align leadership, coaching, and quarterback vision in one clear direction. Instead, Cleveland once again shows ambiguity, and history suggests that when this franchise stands in the middle of the road, it usually ends up getting hit from both sides. The tragedy isn't that the Browns might be wrong about their quarterback, it's that they might never truly find out because they never fully let him be the answer.